The Mafia boss froze when the black maid dragged his son from a burning bedroom and smoke filled the entire hall. Maya Carter had worked as the maid for the Romano family for over 2 years, quietly blending into the background, unseen and unheard. She wasn't important to the family. She was just a part of the staff, a helper, someone who cleaned and cooked and took care of the house. But Maya knew that sometimes the quietest ones held the most power in their hearts. That evening, however, nothing could prepare her for what was about to unfold. The fire started with a loud crack, the sound of wood splintering, followed by the thick smell of smoke seeping into the house. Maya was in the kitchen, scrubbing the counters when she heard it. At first, it was just a faint smell, something that could have been brushed off as nothing more than burnt food. But then she heard the screams. The flames had caught quickly in the upper wing of the house, the part of the mansion where Vincent Romano's son, Luca, slept. The fire spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Panic set in. The house was enormous, and the halls echoed with the sound of chaos. But Maya wasn't going to wait around. The thought of little Luca alone, helpless in that room, was all she could think about. Without a second thought, she ran toward the stairs. The heat was unbearable as she sprinted toward the wing. She could feel the smoke thickening around her, clogging her lungs. Her eyes stung, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. When she reached Luca's door, it was already too late. Flames were licking the edges of the walls, the fire roaring behind the door. But she didn't hesitate. Maya kicked the door open with all her strength. And there, in the middle of the smoke-filled room, was Luca, crying, disoriented, and terrified. The room was full of thick smoke, and the heat was overwhelming, but Maya grabbed him, scooping him into her arms. She could barely breathe, but she didn't care. She would get him out. She had to. As she turned to leave, the hallway outside the room was a blur of fire and heat. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled, her legs burning, her body screaming for rest. But Luca was safe, in her arms, and that was all that mattered. She reached the stairs, but the path down was blocked by the thick, suffocating smoke. Maya could feel her strength waning, but she pressed on, clutching Luca to her chest, not stopping, not even for a second. And then, just as she thought she couldn't go any further, she saw him. Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss himself, standing at the bottom of the stairs, his dark eyes locked on her. He didn't say a word, but the look on his face was enough. He froze. Maya didn't know if it was fear, disbelief, or something else, but there was something in his eyes. Without a second thought, Vincent moved toward her, his hand steady as he helped her down the stairs. The fire raged behind them, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. She had done it. She had saved his son. And somehow, despite the chaos, despite the fire that had consumed their home, Maya knew that this was a moment that would change everything. Maya's chest was still heaving, her heart pounding as Vincent helped her make her way down the grand staircase. The smoke was thick, swirling around them like a suffocating fog, but she couldn't stop, couldn't rest until Luca was safe. She felt his tiny body shaking in her arms, but he was breathing, he was alive, and that was all that mattered. As they reached the foyer, Vincent's men were already springing into action, their faces grim but determined. The house was a wreck, smoke curling up from the upper floors, but they moved with precision, shouting orders, securing exits, and making sure everyone was accounted for. Vincent, still holding onto Maya's arm as she stumbled, looked down at her with a mixture of disbelief and something else she couldn't quite read. He didn't speak, but his eyes were intense, his gaze flicking from her to Luca, then back again. Maya tried to steady herself, her legs weak beneath her, her body still shaking from the adrenaline. She had never imagined she would be in this position, saving the child of the most powerful man in the city, a man whose name was whispered with fear and respect. Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss, was not the type of man who needed saving. He was the one who did the saving. Yet here they were, standing in the foyer of his mansion, and Maya had just saved his son's life. She couldn't stop thinking about the look on his face when he saw her carrying Luca through the smoke, his eyes wide with something she hadn't expected, gratitude. She glanced up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time since she'd run into the burning building. Is he? Vincent's voice was low, his words trailing off as he looked at Luca, who was still clinging to her. Maya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. He's okay. He's breathing, Vincent. He'll be fine. Vincent's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around her arm as he stared at Luca. He didn't say anything more, but Maya could feel the weight of his emotions. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the distant crackling of the fire. Then, without warning, Vincent gently pulled Maya away from the crowd of his men, his voice soft but firm. "Come with me," he said, guiding her toward a nearby room. Maya hesitated for just a moment, but then she followed him, not sure what else to do. She was exhausted, her body aching from the ordeal, but she couldn't stop now. She had to make sure Luca was all right, make sure he was safe. The room Vincent led her to was his private office, a large space with dark wood furniture and soft lighting. It felt worlds apart from the chaos and destruction of the house. Vincent motioned for Maya to sit on one of the plush chairs, and she did, her muscles protesting with each movement. Luca was still in her arms, clutching her tightly, his small face pressed against her chest. Vincent stood at the window, his back to her, looking out over the now darkened grounds. The fire was still burning in the distance, but the worst of it seemed to be contained. Maya watched him, unsure of what to say. She had never been this close to him before, never had a reason to be. She had always kept to the background, a quiet servant, doing her job without drawing attention. But tonight, everything had changed. She had saved his son, and that was something she knew he would never forget. After what felt like an eternity, Vincent turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that Maya couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to hearing him speak to her like that, with such sincerity. "You saved him," he continued, his voice a little firmer now. "I don't know what I would have done if something happened to him." Maya swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. "I just did what anyone would do," she said quietly, her eyes on Luca, who had fallen asleep in her arms. Vincent stepped closer, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he spoke again. "Not everyone would. But you did." Maya didn't know how to respond to that. She had done what she felt was right, what any mother would have done, but Vincent wasn't the kind of man who trusted easily. He didn't show weakness. He didn't need saving. But here they were, and somehow, she had become the one to protect his son. He walked over to the desk and grabbed something from the drawer, a piece of paper and a pen. Without looking at her, he spoke again, his voice more businesslike now. "I'll make sure you're compensated for this," he said, writing something down. Maya's heart sank a little. She hadn't done it for money. She hadn't done it for any kind of reward. She had just done it because it was the right thing to do. But she didn't argue. Vincent handed her the paper, his eyes still not meeting hers. "Take this," he said, his voice softer now. "You'll be taken care of." Maya nodded, taking the paper from him without a word. She didn't know what to say, how to respond to such generosity. But as she looked at Vincent, standing there in his tailored suit, his powerful frame shadowed by the soft light of the office, she knew this moment would change everything. The fire might have been contained, but the fire between them, the shift in their relationship, was only just beginning. Maya had barely slept that night. Her body was still recovering from the intense ordeal, and yet her mind was restless. She had never expected her life to turn out like this, to become the one who saved Vincent Romano's son. The Mafia boss himself, a man whose very name sent chills through the city, had been the one to thank her, to acknowledge her, in a way no one ever had. As the morning sun filtered through the curtains of the guest room Vincent had insisted she stay in, Maya found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. The mansion had quieted since the fire, the chaos of the night before now just a memory. But something had changed. Something had shifted between her and Vincent, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She glanced at the paper Vincent had given her, a piece of compensation for saving Luca. The money was substantial, but it wasn't what had caught her attention. It was the promise of more, a promise that she would be taken care of. Maya didn't know what to make of it. She hadn't done it for money. She hadn't done it for anything except to save Luca. But the way Vincent looked at her now, the way his eyes lingered on her in the aftermath of the fire, made her feel like there was more to this story than she realized. She couldn't deny the strange pull she felt toward him. It wasn't love, not yet, but there was something about Vincent Romano, the man who controlled the city with his power and influence, that made her heart race in a way she couldn't explain. She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts. She was overthinking it. She had a job to do, and she had to stay focused. As Maya stood to leave the room, a soft knock on the door interrupted her. She opened it to find one of Vincent's men standing outside. "Mr. Romano requests your presence in the study," he said, his expression serious. Maya nodded, her stomach tightening. She hadn't seen Vincent since the night of the fire, and the idea of facing him again, after everything that had happened, made her nervous. Still, she followed the man through the halls of the mansion, her steps hesitant but determined. When she reached the study, the door opened to reveal Vincent standing by the window, his back to her. He turned as she entered, his gaze locking onto hers. "Maya," he said, his voice low but steady. "Come in." She stepped forward, feeling the weight of his attention on her. Vincent's presence was always commanding, but now, after the events of the night before, there was something different about the way he carried himself. He didn't seem like the same man who had stood in the doorway, watching her drag Luca from the fire. This Vincent was softer, more human. Maya took a seat across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to expect from this conversation. "How are you feeling?" Vincent asked, his voice unusually gentle. Maya blinked, surprised by the question. She had expected him to get straight to business, to talk about the fire or the compensation, but instead, he seemed to genuinely care. "I'm okay," she said slowly. "Still a little shaken up, but I'll be fine." Vincent nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want to make sure you're taken care of," he said. "Not just because you saved Luca, but because you deserve it. You did something last night that most people would never have done. You put yourself in danger for my son." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't used to hearing praise from people like Vincent. She had always been the one who gave, the one who helped, but never the one who received. "I did what anyone would have done," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. Vincent's expression softened. "Not everyone would," he said, "and that's why I'm grateful. You've proven something to me, Maya. Something I've never seen in anyone who works for me. You've shown that there's more to you than meets the eye." Maya didn't know how to respond to that. She had never thought of herself as anything special. She had always been just a maid, just a servant. But something in Vincent's words made her feel seen, like maybe, just maybe, she was more than she had ever given herself credit for. "I want to offer you something," Vincent continued, breaking the silence. "I can't have you working in this house as just a maid anymore. Not after what you did. You've earned more than that." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincent leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I want you to work for me, Maya. Not as a maid, but as someone who is part of my family. I'm offering you a position, a chance to be more than just an employee. You'll be well taken care of, financially and otherwise." Maya's head was spinning. This was unexpected, overwhelming even. She had never imagined anything like this. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent stood up and walked over to the window, his back turned to her once again. "Because you've proven that you're someone I can trust," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And because I owe you. You saved my son's life. I can't repay that, but I can offer you something better than money. I can offer you a future." Maya's mind raced. This was too much to process all at once. She had always lived in the shadows, in the background, never expecting anything more than what she was given. But now, everything had changed. She looked up at Vincent, her heart heavy with uncertainty. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. Vincent turned back to face her, his eyes softening. "You don't have to say anything right now. Take some time. But know this, whatever you decide, I'll be here. And I'll make sure you're safe." Maya nodded, her mind still spinning, but deep down, she knew that whatever decision she made, her life would never be the same again. Maya had spent the next few days in a daze. The offer Vincent had made weighed heavily on her mind, pulling her in two different directions. Part of her wanted to accept, wanted to believe that she was worth more than just being the maid, than just being invisible in the eyes of the world. But another part of her, the one that had lived her life in the shadows, was terrified of stepping into the light, of becoming someone who mattered in a world so different from her own. The mansion was quiet now, the smell of smoke still lingering in the air, though the damage from the fire had been contained. Maya spent her days taking care of Luca, playing with him, making sure he was okay. The little boy seemed to trust her completely, his laughter filling the empty rooms of the mansion like music. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, she had pulled him from a burning bedroom, his tiny body trembling in her arms. But now he was safe, and she had done that. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had done something that mattered. But still, the question of Vincent's offer lingered in the back of her mind. He had given her time to think, but she knew that time was running out. Vincent would expect an answer soon, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what that answer might mean. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the mansion, Maya found herself once again standing in front of Vincent's office door. She had come to a decision, though she wasn't sure if it was the right one. She took a deep breath and knocked. Vincent's voice, calm and steady, called out from inside. "Come in." Maya pushed the door open, her heart pounding in her chest. Vincent was sitting behind his desk, the soft light of the desk lamp casting a shadow over his face. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Maya," he said, his voice soft, "you've made your decision." Maya nodded, stepping further into the room. "I have," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I've thought about it a lot, Vincent. About what you offered me." Vincent didn't speak, didn't interrupt, but his gaze never left her face. "I've spent my whole life being invisible," she continued. "I've always been just a maid, just someone who cleaned and took care of things without anyone noticing. And when the fire happened, when I saved Luca, I realized something." She took a deep breath. "I realized that I want more than that. I want to matter. I want to do something that counts, something that means something. And I think working for you, not as a maid, but as someone who is part of this family, could give me that chance." Vincent's expression softened, his eyes studying her carefully. For a moment, it was as though the world had slowed down, and all that mattered was the decision she had just made. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Maya nodded. "I'm sure," she said, her heart beating faster now. "I don't know what the future holds, Vincent, but I'm ready to take the chance. I'm ready to step into the light, even if it's scary, even if it means being seen for the first time in my life." Vincent stood up from his desk, his movements deliberate and measured. He walked around the desk, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've made a wise choice," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I'll make sure you're taken care of, Maya. You're part of this family now, and I'll protect you, just as I would anyone else I care about." Maya looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never imagined that a man like Vincent Romano, someone so powerful, so feared, could show her kindness, could see her as more than just a maid. But here he was, offering her something more than she had ever dreamed of. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Vincent smiled, a small but genuine smile that made his usually stern face seem softer. "You don't have to thank me, Maya," he said. "You earned it. You earned a place here, with us." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of belonging that she had never known before. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was finally being seen, finally being valued. "What now?" she asked, her voice still trembling slightly. Vincent's smile widened. "Now, we start a new chapter," he said. "And we do it together." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Maya knew that this was just the beginning of something new, something that would change both of their lives forever. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what the future held. She was ready for it. Maya woke up the next morning with a strange sense of anticipation in the pit of her stomach. The decision she had made the night before still felt surreal, and as she sat up in the large bed of the guest room Vincent had given her, the reality of it all began to sink in. She was no longer just a maid. She was part of something bigger, something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for a long time. Vincent's words echoed in her mind as she stood and walked to the window, looking out over the mansion's sprawling grounds. For the first time, the view felt different, as if she was seeing it with new eyes. The mansion, once just a place she worked, now felt like a part of her world. She had worked hard, given so much of herself to survive, but this was a new chapter, and it was terrifying. As she dressed and prepared to face her new life, Maya's thoughts wandered back to Vincent. His kindness, his protection, it was all so unexpected. A man like him, someone so powerful, so untouchable, had given her a place in his world. He hadn't just thanked her for saving his son, he had made her feel like she mattered. Maya couldn't ignore the impact of that. It was something she had never felt before. The weight of her old life, the struggles, the loneliness, all of it seemed like it was slipping away. She didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had a choice. As she walked down the grand hallway toward the kitchen, her heart began to race. Today would be the first day of her new role, her new life. She knew she had to face Vincent again, and this time, it would be different. He had shown her trust, given her a chance, and now, she had to prove herself. When she entered the kitchen, she found Vincent already there, sitting at the large marble island with a cup of coffee in hand. His dark eyes met hers as she walked in, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both waiting for the other to break the silence. Finally, Vincent stood and walked over to her. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but still carrying the weight of authority. Maya nodded, a little unsure of how to respond. "Good morning, Vincent," she said quietly. "Are you ready for today?" he asked, his gaze steady on her. Maya hesitated for a moment before nodding again. "Yes, I think so." Vincent smiled slightly, a hint of pride in his eyes. "I know it's a big change for you," he said, his voice softer now, "but I believe in you." Maya felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with nervousness. This wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about proving herself, showing Vincent that he hadn't made a mistake in trusting her. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let you down." Vincent nodded, his expression serious. "I know you won't," he said. "But today, I need to see how you handle things. I want you to help me with some business matters, to show me that you're ready to take on more responsibility." Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment she would either rise to the occasion or fail. But she wasn't going to fail. She couldn't. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Vincent didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made Maya feel like she was on the right path. He led her to a small office off the main hall, a room she had never entered before. It was simple but elegant, with a large wooden desk and bookshelves filled with files and paperwork. Vincent took a seat behind the desk and gestured for Maya to sit across from him. "I've got some meetings coming up," he said, his tone businesslike. "I need you to review these documents and make sure everything is in order. You'll be handling a lot of this in the future, so it's important you understand how things work around here." Maya sat down, taking a deep breath. She had always been good at paperwork, good at organizing and making sure everything was in place. This was her chance to prove that she could handle more than just cleaning, that she could contribute to something bigger. She glanced at the stack of documents in front of her, feeling the weight of the responsibility. As she began to read through the first few papers, she found herself slipping into a rhythm. The familiar feeling of focusing on details, making sure everything was correct, was comforting. It was like she had found her place, her role, within Vincent's world. Time seemed to slip away as she worked, and before she knew it, the room had grown dark, the sun setting outside. Vincent hadn't said much, but he had been watching her, observing her as she worked. Finally, he spoke. "You're doing well, Maya," he said, his voice low. "I'm impressed." Maya's heart swelled with pride. She had done it. She had proven herself, at least for today. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. "I won't let you down." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you won't," he said. "This is just the beginning, Maya. You're part of this now. You're part of my world." Those words hit her harder than she expected. Part of his world. Maya had never imagined she would hear those words, never dreamed she would have a place in the world of someone like Vincent Romano. But here she was, standing in front of him, ready for whatever came next. The fire had burned down, but something else had ignited in its place. And Maya was ready to see where it would lead. Maya woke up the next morning to a quiet house, the kind of silence that only comes after a storm. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft golden light over the mansion's grand hall. She had spent the last few hours thinking about everything that had happened, everything that had changed since the fire. And now, she was about to face a new day, one that would be different from all the others. She had made her choice. She had decided to stay. As she walked through the halls, Maya felt a sense of nervous excitement bubbling inside her. She was no longer just the maid. She wasn't invisible anymore. Vincent had offered her a place in his world, and she was determined to prove that she belonged. The morning was peaceful, almost surreal, and as Maya made her way to the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. She wasn't sure what it was, but she could sense it. It wasn't just the house that was different now. She was different too. Vincent's offer had changed everything. She had spent most of her life feeling invisible, like nothing more than a servant, someone to be overlooked and dismissed. But now, she was seen. And that realization came with both comfort and fear. Maya wasn't used to being noticed, to being important. She had always kept to herself, stayed in the background, never asking for anything. But now, she was part of something bigger, something she couldn't quite comprehend. When she entered the kitchen, she found Vincent sitting at the large wooden table, reading through a set of papers. His presence was commanding as always, but there was a subtle shift in the air. He looked up as she entered, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was something different in his gaze today, something softer. "Good morning, Maya," he said, his voice warm, yet laced with authority. Maya smiled faintly, unsure of what to say. "Good morning, Vincent," she replied, her voice steady. Vincent nodded, setting the papers aside as he stood up. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his tone serious. Maya felt her heart race. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Vincent would tell her what was expected of her, what her role would be in his world. She stepped closer, trying to steady her breath. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent looked at her for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. "You've shown me that you're more than just someone who does the work," he said, his voice firm. "You're resourceful, you're intelligent, and you have the kind of integrity that I don't find often in people." Maya's chest tightened at his words. She had never been praised like this before, not by anyone. She had always been just a maid, just a worker. But now, Vincent was telling her that she was more. It was a strange feeling, one that made her heart swell and her hands tremble. "I want you to help me with something," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's time for you to step into a more active role. I want you to be more than just someone who handles paperwork. I want you to be part of my team, someone I can trust to handle important matters." Maya blinked, her mind racing to catch up with his words. "You want me to work with you?" she asked, her voice soft. Vincent nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, I need someone like you, Maya. Someone who isn't afraid to take charge, who can handle difficult situations and make decisions. You've already proven you can do that." Maya's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment that would define her future. She had never thought of herself as someone who could be in charge, someone who could make decisions. But here Vincent was, offering her a chance to be something more, something she had never allowed herself to believe she could be. I don't know what to say," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Vincent smiled, a small but genuine smile. "You don't have to say anything yet, but I want you to think about it. This is a big decision. It's not just about the job. It's about becoming part of something much bigger. It's about becoming part of my world." Maya stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. This was more than she had ever imagined. She had come to the mansion as a maid, someone to be overlooked, someone who had no place in the world of the powerful and the wealthy. But now, she was being offered a seat at the table. She was being offered a place in Vincent's world. And she couldn't deny the pull of it, the desire to be more, to be seen for who she truly was. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. Vincent nodded. "Take your time. But know this, Maya, I believe in you. You're capable of more than you realize." Maya looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was being seen, like she mattered. And that was something she never thought she would feel. As she left the kitchen, Maya knew that her life had changed. She had been given a choice, a chance to step into a world she had never imagined. And as terrifying as it was, she knew she was ready. Ready to become something more. Ready to be seen. Maya spent the next few days adjusting to the new role Vincent had given her. Every step felt like walking on new ground. The familiar world she had once known slipping further away with each passing moment. She had been the maid, the invisible woman who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. But now, she was something more. It wasn't just the job that had changed, it was everything. She had already begun handling some of the more delicate tasks Vincent had assigned her, and though the work was challenging, she found herself surprisingly competent. The meetings, the paperwork, the decisions, it was all a far cry from the quiet life she had once led. But she was beginning to thrive in this new world, a world that was not so foreign anymore. The hardest part was adjusting to the people around her, the staff and Vincent's associates who had once viewed her as nothing more than a maid. But now, she was no longer just a part of the background. She was a part of Vincent's world, and that came with both respect and suspicion. As she walked through the mansion that morning, Maya's mind was racing. She had been spending more time with Vincent lately, working alongside him, discussing business matters, and occasionally sharing small, quiet moments. There was a comfort in his presence, but also an unease. It wasn't just the shift in her role, it was the way she felt around him. His words echoed in her mind. "You're part of this family now." Maya wasn't sure what that meant, what it meant to be part of Vincent's world. She had never been part of something like this before. It was a life of power, influence, and danger, a life she could never have imagined for herself. But now, it was her reality. She walked into the study, where Vincent was reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was a softness in his gaze, something that made her heart race, but she couldn't quite understand it. "Maya," he said, his voice warm, "I need your help with something." Maya nodded, stepping further into the room. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady. "What do you need?" Vincent gestured for her to sit across from him, and she did, watching him closely as he sorted through the papers. "There's a meeting later today with a few key people from the business. I want you to come with me. You'll be sitting in, helping with the details." Maya's heart skipped a beat. A meeting. She had never been to one of Vincent's meetings before, but she knew what it meant. She would be in the presence of powerful men, people who controlled the city, the kind of people who didn't think twice about their actions. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that, but she wasn't about to let fear hold her back. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice firm. Vincent nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I know you will be." Later that afternoon, Maya stood in the back of the room as the meeting began. Vincent sat at the head of the long table, flanked by several of his closest associates. Maya felt out of place, but she stood tall, watching closely as the discussions unfolded. The men around the table spoke in hushed tones, their voices low but their words sharp, each one maneuvering for their own interests. Maya absorbed everything, her mind racing to keep up with the complexity of the situation. It was a world she had never known, a world where every decision mattered, where power was traded in whispers and glances. As the meeting went on, Maya found herself taking notes, not just on the business discussions, but on the way Vincent conducted himself. There was a quiet confidence in him, a calm authority that seemed to demand respect without effort. He wasn't just a man of power. He was a man who knew how to use that power. As the meeting drew to a close, Vincent turned to her. "You did well today," he said, his voice low. Maya felt a rush of pride at his words. It had been a small step, but it was a step forward. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You're learning quickly," he said. Maya nodded, though her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened. The world she had entered was not an easy one, and it would take everything she had to keep up. But there was something else, something she couldn't ignore. The way Vincent looked at her, the way he seemed to trust her, made her feel like she was more than just a maid, more than just an employee. There was a bond between them, something unspoken, something that neither of them had yet acknowledged. Maya didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a part of the background. She was part of this world now, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences for Maya. She had quickly adapted to her new role in Vincent's world, taking on tasks that were both challenging and rewarding. Every meeting, every discussion, felt like another step towards something bigger than herself. She had moved from the shadows to the center of Vincent's empire, and though she had never imagined herself in such a position, she found herself growing into the role with more confidence each day. But it wasn't just the work that was changing her, it was the moments she shared with Vincent. His presence had become a constant in her life, and as much as she tried to keep her distance, there was an undeniable pull between them. It wasn't just the way he looked at her, the trust he had placed in her, or the way he spoke to her with respect. There was something more, something that neither of them had acknowledged, but both of them felt. Vincent had been patient, giving her time to adjust, but Maya could sense that things were shifting. Their interactions had become more frequent, their conversations more personal. They spoke about business, yes, but there were moments when the conversation drifted to other things, to things that were more human, more vulnerable. Vincent had shared pieces of his life with her, his family, his past, the things that shaped him into the man he was today. And Maya had found herself doing the same, slowly opening up in a way she hadn't done in years. It wasn't easy for her. She had spent so much of her life hiding parts of herself, locking away her emotions and fears. But with Vincent, it felt different. He listened, truly listened, and that made her feel seen, in a way no one ever had before. But as their connection deepened, so did the weight of it. Maya couldn't ignore the fact that she was becoming more than just Vincent's trusted assistant. She was becoming someone important to him, and that scared her. She wasn't used to being needed, to being relied upon in such a personal way, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what that meant. It was one evening, after a long day of meetings, when everything came to a head. Maya had just finished going over some paperwork in the study when Vincent entered the room. He had that familiar look in his eyes, the one that made her heart race, the one that made her feel like she was on the verge of something. "Maya," he said, his voice low, "can we talk?" She looked up at him, feeling a flutter in her chest. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent walked over to where she was sitting, his movements deliberate, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was charged, filled with unspoken words, feelings that neither of them had acknowledged. Finally, Vincent broke the silence. "I know this is all new to you," he said, his voice softer now. "And I know you're probably still adjusting. But I need you to understand something." Maya's heart began to pound. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the intensity of his presence. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I'm not asking you to do this just because I need someone to help me with business. I'm asking you because I trust you," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "And because I believe in you. You're more than just an assistant to me, Maya. You're becoming someone I care about. And I don't want you to think for a second that I don't see that." Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. She wasn't sure how to respond, how to process the words he had just said. She had always kept her emotions in check, kept everything at arm's length, but now, it felt like everything was changing. "Vincent, she started, but her voice faltered. "You don't have to say anything right now," Vincent interrupted, stepping closer to her. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you decide, whatever happens between us, I'll be here. I'm not asking you to be anyone you're not. I just want you to be yourself." The sincerity in his voice made Maya's heart race even faster. She had never heard Vincent speak to her like this, with such honesty, such openness. It was as if the walls he had built around himself were slowly coming down, and in that moment, Maya realized that the connection between them was not just about business, not just about the job. It was something more, something real. Maya stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at Vincent. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't need to. They were standing there, in the silence of the study, surrounded by the weight of everything that had happened between them, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was alone. She didn't feel like she was hiding. "I'm not ready for everything," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I want to try. I want to be part of this, part of your world." Vincent's expression softened, and for a moment, Maya saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that told her that he understood. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, his voice reassuring. "There's no rush, Maya. We go at your pace." Maya nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure where this path would lead, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to take the first step. Maya stood at the window of Vincent's office, staring out at the city beyond. It had been several weeks since the night of the fire, and each day had brought new challenges, new revelations. Things between her and Vincent had grown more complex, more intimate, but she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Her life, once so simple, now seemed like a puzzle she was trying to solve without all the pieces. The days spent working side by side with Vincent had blurred the lines between business and something more personal. She had learned the ins and outs of the empire he controlled, handled delicate situations with a calm she hadn't known she was capable of, and yet, no matter how much she tried to focus on the work, she couldn't ignore the growing tension between them. Every time they spoke, there was something unspoken lingering in the air, something that neither of them dared to acknowledge but both of them felt. Maya had learned not to trust easily, not after everything she had been through, but Vincent had a way of making her feel like she was someone important, someone worth protecting. And that terrified her. She wasn't used to that feeling. She had always been the one who helped, the one who stayed in the background. But now, with Vincent's trust, with his care, she felt like she was stepping into a world that was far beyond her. It was a world that demanded strength, loyalty, and power. It was a world where she wasn't just the maid, the quiet woman who disappeared into the background, but someone who was now seen, heard, and, whether she liked it or not, valued. Maya's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. She turned to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable but his eyes soft, almost as if he could see right through her. "Maya," he said, his voice calm, "we need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. She had a feeling she knew what this conversation would be about, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. He had always been direct, but there was something different in his tone today, something that made her feel like the ground beneath her was shifting. She nodded and walked toward him, her steps measured, her heart racing. "What's on your mind?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't immediately answer, just looked at her for a long moment, as if he was weighing his words carefully. Maya's nerves started to get the best of her. "Vincent," she prompted, her voice quieter now. "What's going on?" He sighed, his shoulders tense as he finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about the path we're on," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "About everything that's changed since the fire." Maya's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this. The fire had changed everything, but she hadn't realized how much it had affected Vincent. He wasn't just the powerful Mafia boss. He was a man who had to deal with the aftermath of that night, with the fact that someone had saved his son. That someone, she, had risked everything to protect him. "And what path do you think we're on?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the distance between them felt like it had shrunk. "I think," he began slowly, "that you've become more than just someone I trust with business. You've become someone I care about, more than I expected." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Maya felt her heart skip a beat, the gravity of his words hitting her like a wave. She had known there was something between them, but hearing him say it out loud made her feel exposed, vulnerable. "I care about you, Maya," Vincent continued, stepping closer. "I want you to be part of my life, not just in this world I've built, but outside of it too. I don't want you to feel like you're just a part of my business, just someone who's here to serve me. You're more than that." Maya took a deep breath, trying to process his words. She had always kept herself separate from the world of power and wealth that Vincent inhabited, but now, she felt like she was being pulled into it, whether she was ready or not. She had never allowed herself to imagine a life like this, a life where she was seen as more than just a maid. And now, here was Vincent, offering her something she had never dreamed of. "I don't know what to say," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this." Vincent's expression softened, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "You don't have to be ready right now, Maya," he said, his voice reassuring. "We'll take it slow, but I need you to know that you matter to me. Not just because you've saved my son, not just because you're good at what you do, but because of who you are." Maya felt her heart swell in her chest, a mixture of warmth and fear swirling inside her. She wasn't used to being cared for, to being seen in this way, but with Vincent, it felt real. It felt like she had finally found a place where she belonged. She didn't know what would happen next, didn't know where this path would lead, but in that moment, standing in Vincent's office with his hand on hers, she felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. "I'm scared," she whispered, the truth slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "I'm scared of what this could mean, of what it could change." Vincent squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know," he said gently. "But I promise you, Maya, we'll face whatever comes together. You don't have to do this alone." Maya looked up at him, her heart full of uncertainty, but also of something else, something she couldn't quite name. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure of everything, but she knew one thing. She wasn't walking this path alone anymore. And that, in itself, was enough to give her the courage to move forward. Maya had spent the past few days processing everything Vincent had said to her. His words, full of warmth and sincerity, had lingered in her mind like an echo she couldn't escape. She had always been cautious, never allowing herself to hope for something more. But now, here she was, standing on the precipice of a life she had never imagined. The world she had stepped into, the world Vincent had offered her a place in, was one of power, respect, and complexity. Every step felt like a test, every decision held weight. But she wasn't backing down. Maya had spent years living in the shadows, doing what was necessary to survive. But in Vincent's world, things were different. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning, growing, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly seen. The days spent working alongside him had become more meaningful than she could have imagined. The work was challenging, yes, but it was the moments they shared outside of it that made her heart race. Every time he spoke to her, there was a quiet intensity in his voice, a sincerity that made her feel like she was more than just a helper, more than just someone who did the work. He trusted her, and that trust was something she had never experienced before. As the days passed, their connection grew stronger, and with it, the emotions that both of them tried to ignore. Vincent had a way of making her feel like she mattered, like she had a purpose beyond the walls of the mansion. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who was part of his world, and she had begun to see herself in a new light. She had always been careful about letting anyone in, but with Vincent, it felt different. The more time they spent together, the more Maya realized that she didn't just admire him. There was something else, something that made her heart ache every time their eyes met. But she didn't know what to do with those feelings. Vincent hadn't said anything to make her believe he felt the same way. And for a while, she convinced herself it was better to keep things professional, to focus on the work and nothing else. But it was becoming harder to ignore the chemistry between them. She found herself thinking about him more often than she wanted to admit. It was one evening, as they sat together in the study, reviewing some business reports, that the tension between them finally came to a head. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of papers as they went over the details. Maya had been concentrating on the work, but Vincent's presence beside her was undeniable. His scent, the warmth of his body, everything about him seemed to draw her in. She couldn't focus anymore. "Maya," Vincent's voice broke the silence, and she looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something different in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. He wasn't just looking at her as his assistant, his trusted colleague. No, there was something deeper there, something more personal. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low, "about us. About this connection we've developed." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. Her heart was racing, her hands trembling. "Vincent," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He stood up and walked toward her, his steps deliberate, his gaze never leaving hers. "I need to know how you feel," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "I know this is complicated, and I know you've been through a lot, but I can't ignore how I feel about you. And I can't keep pretending like nothing's happening between us." Maya's mind was spinning. She had wanted to deny it, to tell herself that she was imagining things, that this was just about work. But now, with Vincent standing in front of her, there was no denying the truth. She felt it too. She had felt it from the moment they first spoke, from the first time he trusted her with something more than just a task. But she had been too scared to admit it, too scared to let herself believe that someone like him could feel the same way about her. "Vincent, I don't know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "I've never been in this kind of situation before. I've always kept my distance. I've always kept myself safe." He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice soft. "But I'm here, Maya, and I want you to know that I care about you. I'm not asking you to jump into something you're not ready for, but I need you to be honest with me. I can't keep pretending like everything is business as usual when it's not." Maya felt her heart swell at his words. She had never heard anyone speak to her like that, with such sincerity, such vulnerability. And in that moment, she realized that she didn't want to keep pretending either. She wanted to be with him, to take the leap, to see where this connection could take them. "I care about you too," she said, her voice steady now, "more than I ever thought I could." Vincent's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was nothing else in the world except the two of them, standing in the study together. No more walls, no more fear. Just a feeling of possibility, a feeling that they had finally found each other in a world that had seemed so far out of reach. "Then let's take this one step at a time," Vincent said, his voice gentle but firm. "We'll figure it out together." Maya nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The days that followed Vincent's confession felt like a strange dream for Maya, each one blurring into the next. She had known from the moment she decided to take this step with him that it wouldn't be easy. The lines between business and something personal were growing increasingly difficult to navigate. Yet, with each passing day, there was a sense of inevitability about it all. The quiet moments they shared, whether in the office, discussing reports, or the rare moments alone when Vincent's guard was down, made her feel a connection she had never expected. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just an assistant. She was something more, something Vincent had acknowledged. He cared for her, and for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just existing. She was living, truly living, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. But with that closeness came fear. Fear of losing herself in Vincent's world. Fear of the responsibility that came with being a part of his life. She had never been one to rely on anyone, never one to be vulnerable. Yet, every time Vincent smiled at her, every time he spoke to her with such warmth, it felt like a safety she wasn't sure she deserved. Still, she was here. She was in this world now, and there was no turning back. As much as she had doubts, she couldn't ignore the pull between them. And Vincent seemed to sense her hesitation, always patient, always giving her the space she needed to process everything. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the mansion, Maya found herself alone in the study, sifting through some paperwork. The room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. She was so absorbed in the task that she didn't hear the door open. When she looked up, Vincent was standing there, watching her. He hadn't spoken, but his presence filled the room, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, but neither of them seemed ready to break the silence. Finally, Vincent stepped forward, his footsteps soft against the carpet. "Maya," he said, his voice low but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about you. About us." Maya's heart skipped a beat, and she placed the papers down on the desk. She wasn't sure what to say, how to respond. Vincent had always been direct, but there was a vulnerability in his voice that caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quieter now, unsure of what he was about to say. Vincent moved closer, stopping just a few feet away from her. "I know this is complicated," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I know you've had to adjust to a lot, but I want you to know that I'm not just asking you to be part of my life because of business. I want you to be part of my life because I care about you, Maya." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and for a moment, Maya felt as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. She had known it, of course. She had known there was something between them, something neither of them had fully acknowledged. But hearing it out loud, hearing him say it so simply, made it feel real. "Vincent," she whispered, her heart racing. She wanted to say so much, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, comforting, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. "I'm not asking for anything more than what you're ready for," he said, his voice almost tender. "But I want you to know that I'm here, Maya. Whatever you decide, wherever this goes, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Maya looked up at him, her heart full of conflicting emotions. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. Vincent wasn't just offering her a role in his world. He was offering her a place in his life. And that was more than she had ever expected. "I don't know what to say," she admitted softly, her voice trembling. "I've never been in a relationship like this before. I've always kept myself guarded, always kept my distance. Vincent smiled, the kind of smile that made her heart skip. I know, he said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. You don't have to say anything right now. Just know that I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I just want to be with you, Maya. And I want you to know that I'm here for you, whatever comes next. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything Maya had ever heard. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could let go, let herself be vulnerable, and trust someone enough to let them in. It wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't sure what the future would bring, but standing here with Vincent, she felt like she had a choice. A choice to let herself be seen. I want to try, she said, her voice steady now. I want to try, Vincent. With you. His eyes softened, and in that moment, Maya knew that everything was changing. But this time, it felt like change for the better. Together, they would figure out what came next. And for the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel alone. The days that followed felt like a strange combination of clarity and uncertainty for Maya. With each passing moment, she felt herself stepping further into Vincent's world, yet still holding on to a part of her old life. She had accepted his offer, chosen to try, to allow herself to be seen in a way she had never been before. And though the decision had been hard, a part of her knew it was the right one. It was not just about the job anymore. It was about trust, about something deeper than what either of them had imagined. Vincent had given her the space to grow into the role, but there were times when his gaze on her felt like it reached deeper than just business. His presence, his subtle gestures, his voice when he spoke to her, it all hinted at something unspoken, something that neither of them was fully ready to confront. But Maya was no longer willing to let fear dictate her life. She had never let herself get close to anyone, had always kept herself hidden behind the walls of practicality and self-sufficiency. But now, with Vincent, she was starting to feel like she was part of something important, something real. The tension between them was undeniable, and though it was often unspoken, it was always there, lingering in the air between their conversations, in the way their eyes met when they weren't looking. But Maya had promised herself to take things one step at a time. She had given up control for so long, but with Vincent, it was different. She trusted him, more than she had ever trusted anyone, and that trust was what was making her heart race with every quiet moment they shared. It was a late afternoon when Maya walked into the study, her steps slow but determined. The mansion was quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind outside, and the soft tapping of keys as Vincent worked at his desk. She hesitated for a moment at the door before pushing it open, and Vincent looked up from his work, his dark eyes meeting hers. Maya, he said, his voice as steady as always, though there was something softer in his gaze. Come in. She walked toward him, feeling the familiar sense of anticipation that always seemed to rise in her chest when she was near him. How are you? He asked, his voice gentle. It was a simple question, but there was something in it, something that made her feel like he truly cared about how she was feeling. Maya smiled faintly, trying to steady the emotions swirling inside her. I'm good, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Vincent studied her for a moment, his gaze never leaving her face. I've been thinking about everything, he said, his voice low. About you and me. Maya's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had known this moment was coming, the moment when they would have to face what had been building between them. She just didn't know what to expect. Vincent, she started, but he held up a hand, silencing her. I know, he said softly. I know this is complicated. I know what we're doing is different from anything we've done before. But Maya, he paused, his voice steady but filled with an intensity she hadn't heard before. I need you to know something. I care about you. More than you realize. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had heard those words before, in different contexts, but hearing Vincent say them with such sincerity made her heart race. She had never allowed herself to feel this way about anyone, had never allowed herself to imagine that someone like Vincent could feel the same. Vincent, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I didn't expect any of this. He stood up from behind his desk, walking slowly toward her. You don't have to say anything, he said, his voice soothing. But I want you to know that I'm here. For you. Whatever this is, whatever happens, I'm here. His words were like a lifeline, something that anchored her in the uncertainty she had been feeling. She wanted to say something, to tell him that she was scared, that she didn't know how to navigate the emotions she was feeling, but she didn't need to. In that moment, standing there with him, she realized she didn't have to have all the answers. She just had to trust. And that was the hardest part. "I want to try, Vincent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to try with you." Vincent's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. He didn't say anything, just reached out and gently touched her hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. It was everything. "We'll take it slow," he said, his voice reassuring. "There's no rush. We don't have to have everything figured out right now. I just need you to know that I'm not going anywhere." Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders at his words. For so long, she had held herself back, convinced that opening up to anyone was a mistake. But with Vincent, everything felt different. She wasn't just opening up to him. She was opening up to herself. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart full. Vincent smiled, his eyes warm, and in that moment, Maya knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but together, they would face them. And for the first time, Maya felt like she wasn't alone in this world anymore. She had someone who saw her, who cared for her, who wanted to be with her. And that was something she had never imagined. But now, she couldn't imagine life without it. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of uncertainty for Maya. Though Vincent's words had brought her a sense of comfort, a part of her still felt the weight of everything that had changed. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn, but here she was, standing in Vincent's world, with all the complexities that came with it. They spent more time together, both in and out of the office, and every time Vincent looked at her, it was harder to deny the growing feelings that had started to take root in her heart. She wasn't sure if he truly understood the depth of her emotions, but she knew she was no longer just the invisible woman in the background. She was seen, acknowledged, and cared for. But there were still moments when doubt crept in. She had spent so long guarding her heart, keeping her distance from anyone who could hurt her. Now, with Vincent, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something uncertain, something that could either lift her up or tear her apart. And as much as she wanted to believe in what they had, she was still scared. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Maya found herself walking through the hallways of the mansion, the soft glow of the lights casting shadows on the walls. The house was quieter than usual, the usual hum of activity muted in the late hours. She walked toward the study, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. When she pushed open the door, she found Vincent standing by the window, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn when she entered, but there was a stillness about him that told her he had been waiting for her. "Maya," he said, his voice low but filled with something she couldn't quite place. She closed the door behind her and took a step toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent turned to face her, his eyes dark and intense. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady, "about everything. About us." Maya's stomach tightened. She had known this conversation was coming, but she hadn't expected it to feel so heavy. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincent took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know that I'm asking you to trust me with more than just your work. But I need you to understand something." Maya swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever was about to come. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I care about you, Maya," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I want you to know that I'm not just here because of the business. I'm here because I believe in you. I believe in what we could have." The words hit Maya harder than she expected, and for a moment, she was speechless. She had heard those words before, but never like this. Never with such raw honesty. I don't know what to say," she said finally, her voice trembling. Vincent squeezed her hand, stepping even closer. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I want you here, in my life, not just as someone who works for me, but as someone who means something to me." Maya's heart raced as she looked up at him. She had spent so long, keeping her distance, never allowing herself to get too close to anyone. But Vincent was different. The way he looked at her, the way he made her feel like she mattered, was something she had never experienced before. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't ready to walk away from him. I don't know what this means, Maya said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. But I know I don't want to let go of what we have. Vincent's expression softened, and for a moment, there was nothing between them but the unspoken connection they shared. We don't have to have everything figured out, he said gently. We'll take it one day at a time. But just know that I'm here, Maya. And I'm not going anywhere. Maya nodded, her chest tightening with a mixture of emotions. She didn't know where this would lead, didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew she was ready to find out. With Vincent by her side, she felt like she could take on anything. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a place in the world, a place in Vincent's world. And that was something she had never dared to dream of.